Namaste and very good morning. On behalf of Birbal Sahani Institute of Paleosciences, Lucknow, and National Institute of Disaster Management, I, Shilpa Pandey, scientist at VSIP, Lucknow, welcome all our honorable guests, distinguished speakers, eminent senior researchers, academicians, and all participants, especially students and early career researchers who have shown their interest in this particular webinar, which is to be conducted on the mangroves and disaster risk reduction. As we all know that majority of the human population in the world is concentrated in coastal areas and are more vulnerable to natural disasters such as floods, wind-generated waves, tsunamis, and storm surges. Mangroves are extraordinary and no doubt very beautiful ecosystem found on land-sea interface all along the tropical and subtropical regions of the world. Well, mangroves not only provide goods and services to human beings, but also play a very important role in mitigating coastal disasters like tsunamis, cyclones, and floods. That's very true. Mangroves live like sea walls and more effective than concrete wall structures. So we can call them as a bioshield also. As we know that mangroves' role in coastal protection has been scientifically proved in several parts of the tropical region, that how mangroves protect coastal areas from tsunami. This was well addressed by an example of 26 December 2004, when the largest earthquake in 40 years produced the most devastating tsunami in recorded history, which killed near about 2,83,000 people throughout the Indian Ocean region. Several reports based on initial impact surveys in southeastern India, Andaman Islands, Sri Lanka indicated that mangroves offered a significant defense against the full impact of the tsunami. So, well, they not only reduce the impact of the cyclones during the 25th century, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC project, has already said that there is likely to be an increase in tropical cyclone field. I request Professor Deshmukh to please mute his microphone. To an increase in tropical cyclone wind intensities and increase in tropical cyclone mean and peak precipitation intensities in some areas as a result of global climate change. They have also a very good role in flood protection too. So as a consequences, the mangrove ecosystem have attracted an increasing amount of attention from land and ocean managers, conservation communities, and academia in all over the world. The main aim to conduct this webinar on mangroves and disaster risk reduction is to understand the role of the mangroves ecosystem in minimizing the impact of marine hazards like tsunamis, floods, and cyclones. With this, I hope we are going to have very interactive and informative session today. And without further ado, may I request our Director BSIP, Dr. Vandana Prasad, for his inaugural address, but unfortunately she has to attend some official meeting, so she's out of station. So on behalf of Dr. Vandana Prasad, Director BSIP, I request Dr. Anjum Farooqui to give her inaugural address. Dr. Anjum Farooqui, please. So before she starts, I would like to introduce her, that Dr. Anjum Farooqui is a very eminent mangrove worker, and she is scientist and head of quaternary division. So Dr. Anjum Farooqui, please.
Thank you, Shilpa. A very good morning to all of you. On behalf of our director, Dr. Vandana Prasad of Birbal Sahani Institute of Paleosciences, and on my own, I warmly greet and welcome you all for this meeting. And I see a galaxy of scientists and friends have gathered here and have taken a very good initiative to discuss on a very important topic of risk reduction during the disaster that we every year face in many ways. May it be natural or sometimes it is human made also. So we have to be very particular and find several good strategies to quickly maintain and manage the disasters that we face in India in many ways. So I'm really happy that both Birbal Sahni Institute of Paleosciences and National Institute of Disaster Management has taken up this initiative, a big initiative that will really, really help us to reduce the risk that we face. And mangroves, as Shilpa has already discussed about and given you introduction, is a very important vegetation all along our very vast coastline of India. And these mangrove vegetations are commonly known as coastal guards, because these protect us from several cyclones, storms, and tsunami like things that we face every year in November, December, and a lot of economic loss and human loss is expected. And we have seen in the last years the people are facing in the coastal areas. And it is not only the human habitation, we have a lot of industrial and several developmental industries that are based on the coastal land, because water is the main necessity of anything. So wherever water is available, may it be the coastal line, coast, seawater, or even along the river line, like even for rivers also, we face floods every year during monsoon season. So water is obviously very essential for human beings, but still every year it creates a lot of disaster, and we have to reduce the risk in order to reduce the economic loss that India faces every year. So without taking any more time, I hope by the end of this meeting, we will be able to gather a lot of information from all the stalwarts that are participating in this meeting. And I hope that some useful and beneficial strategies will be made during this meeting that will help us to prevent the humans which are who are facing these calamities, and also prevent the economic loss that we prepare and we develop every year. And because of these calamities, may it be flood or may it be the coastal disasters, we face a lot of economic loss. So I wish all the speakers to gather a lot of information out of this meeting and prepare some good strategies to reduce the risk management. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Farooqui, for your kind words and sharing information regarding mangroves. From NIDM, we are honored to have an eminent personality for today's event, Dr. R. Subramanian, sir. I request you to kindly mute your microphone, please. So, once again, we are honored to have an eminent personality for today's event. It's my pleasure to introduce Shri Taj Hassan, sir, Executive Director, NIDM, New Delhi. Dr. Shweta, is he going to?
Sorry, Dr. Shilpa, sensor is not come yet, so we need to join today. Next time maybe.
Okay, so it seems that because of his busy schedule, he is not able to join today's event. So now we have another eminent personality with us, who is a chairperson of this event, Professor Anil Gupta, sir. So before Anil Gupta, sir, speak and give his inaugural address, I would like to introduce him. Professor Gupta is Professor and Head of Environment and Climate Disaster Risk Management Department of NIDM New Delhi. Professor Gupta is a sustainability risk management strategist working in the area of disaster management, environment, and climate resilience for more than 25 years with national, subnational, and business administrations. He's looking after various international and national projects of policy research planning and capacity building. So with these words, I invite Dr. Gupta to please give an inaugural address. Professor Gupta. Professor Gupta, can you hear me? Dr. Shweta, can you connect with Dr. Gupta?
Dr. Shilpa, Professor Gupta is in a bad patch, it seems. So he will join back in 5 minutes. So you can continue. He will join again.
Okay, Shweta. So can we start from you? I mean, may I request you to say a few words for today's event? And before you start, once again, I would like to introduce you. Dr. Shweta Bedidas has done her PhD in oceanography from CSIR National Institute of Oceanography, Goa. She has worked extensively on the paleoclimate, especially the paleomonsoon shift from last glacial maxima to Holocene. Later, she has worked on desertification and land degradation in JNU, that is Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. She has also has an experience of working on glaciology in Ministry of Earth Sciences. She was a faculty of disaster management in Jamia Millia Islamia University. At present, she is working as consultant at National Institute of Disaster Management, New Delhi. So with this, I request Dr. Shweta to please say a few words for today's evening.
Thank you, Dr. Shilpa. And today I'm really happy because, first of all, you have taken such a wonderful topic. And this is really a sensitive topic because we cannot deny the importance of mangrove, especially in disaster management. If we are talking about from the disaster management point of view, because since I'm from NIDM, I'll talk from the disaster management point of view. So there are numerous, things that we actually get from mangroves, and in return, most probably we don't give anything to them. So before I go to that, I will also like to explain that why I'm so happy today, because after a long time, I got to see Professor Nigam sir here, because he was one of my guides in NIO, and after really long years, we got to see him. But Shilpa, I can see Professor Gupta sir is here, so I think he can.
Okay. Professor Gupta is here. Now, once again, I already introduced with all of you Professor Gupta, and now I request Professor Gupta to kindly say a few words for today's event.
Thank you. Very good morning to all. And am I audible?
Yes, sir, very much.
Actually, I have come for some meeting here. So at some locations here, the network problem is there. But anyway, I was able to listen to you all the preliminary conversation also, and I'm feeling really very happy that this group has assembled here to discuss on a very important aspect that in the present time we are considering a very important strategic innovation that is needed in the area of disaster risk management, because in fact when we faced major cyclones, then it is already evident that how mangroves have acted as the defense against the impact of cyclones. So discussing about mangroves, their roles in disaster risk reduction in various ways. One is that as a barrier, as a defense, that can help reduce the intensity of the storms and reduce the damages. But on the other hand, it also helps the reduce the vulnerability of the community, because it offers a lot of ecosystem services to help people's livelihood, people's health resources, supports biodiversity because it is a good breeding many other species. So today's discussion is going to be very this program organized by Birbal Sahani Institute. I'm happy to note that now it is the Institute of Paleo Sciences. Earlier it used to be the Institute of Paleobotany, because then in fact I was recalling my association and my interactions with Professor Saxena, the founder of the institute, who hailed from almost my hometown. So we after his retirement, after his superannuation also, we used to sit with him and we used to activity. We still recall the fossil of coconut kept in his drawing room, and it's wonderful. I have been in Lucknow also for almost more than 4 years, working with Ambedkar University. I used to visit Birbal Sahni Institute also, Dr. Bajpayee was working with us as a registrar for some time, long back. And I saw the experts from NIO Goa. So I was calling my stay at NIO way back in 1993 when the Indian Science Congress was hosted there in 1993, and I was there. One day I was talking to Shweta about the excellent garden and the premises of the NIO. So it's really wonderful having the people who know each other and then discussing on this team. In fact, I have been witnessing the activities of Mangroves for the Future program, and since I am a member of South Asia Core Group of IUCN Commission on Ecosystem Management, so I find that this webinar is a very important contribution. Dr. Shweta must recall that we had organized a big meeting in Delhi, I think it was 2018, on the promoting the rule of mangroves, and not only promoting but how do we mainstream into planning process. That is very important because the small interventions for mangrove rejuvenations were there. I had the opportunity to visit and see the Pichavaram location in near Puducherry, that near Chidambaram, and could see that how rejuvenated, and even in Surat coast also. But I still feel that there's a lot to do in rejuvenating the mangroves as an ecosystem. So mangrove plantation is one thing, but how do we work to kind of a ecosystem structural and functional recovery of these systems? So that is also very important. And today we are going to listen to eminent speakers on this subject, and that is very important contribution. I would suggest Shweta to think of a rather a 3 days program because mangroves have a lot of dimensions to discuss, and sometimes we think of a compiling a compendium of case studies also. Maybe jointly we can plan with the Sahani Institute and NIU also, and that would be really a wonderful contribution. Because what I saw in the area of nature-based solutions, that we have excellent examples in our countries, Asian countries, and also the island countries of Pacific. But documentation and projections has not been good. Most of the examples come from the European and other developed countries. So recently we published a compendium of around 28 case studies from Asia Pacific, from Springer Nature, jointly with the IUCN, Dr. Madhav Karki and Dr. Dhyani. They were my co-editors. So I'm really very happy to witness, and Dr. Rajiv Saab and नरेंद्र साहब एंड शिल्पा जी के बारे में तो मुझे श्वेता ने बताया ही था. So all others, and I would really look forward that I can meet some of them in person also in future. I'll be hopefully coming to Lucknow next month for a 4 or 5 days stay. So let us see how do we interact and can plan for some joint research or some kind of a joint program together. So thank you very much, and once again I would be looking forward to listen to the speakers. So thank you, and over to you, madam.
Thank you, Professor Gupta, for your kind words and enlighten us by sharing context settings of this event. And you are most welcome at any time. You may visit our BSIP, and we are very happy to hear, especially BSIP community people, very happy to know that you have a long association with the BSIP also and with the NIOTAS. And once again, I welcome Dr. Rajiv Nigam sir and Naren sir also from the view I could see. So moving ahead, again, I request Shweta because she stopped speaking. So can you continue with Dr. Shweta?
Sure. So as I was saying, I'm really happy to see Dr. Rajiv Nigam sir and Anil Kumar sir all are here. It's a nice get together actually after a long time. So without wasting much time, I would just very briefly like to talk about mangrove. So as I feel personally, I did my master's dissertation also on mangroves. But what I would like to talk today is that mangroves are really, really wonderful things. And because whenever nowadays, whenever we are talking about disaster risk reduction, the first thing that we talk about is ecosystem based disaster risk reduction, or the eco DRR, what we call it in short, or a nature based solution. So mangroves are the wonderful thing which can be used for nature based solution, because we get lots and lots of things from mangroves. Can I share a small PPT, Dr. Shilpa? Is that possible?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
I'm not sure my presentation I cannot see here. I'm sorry, I'm not able to see my presentation here. Let it be. I'll just talk like
Yeah.
simply. So basically, what I was talking is that mangroves are important because we can actually see this almost in all the coastal areas of the world. And the most important thing is that this protects the coast. This protects people. But Nigam sir is here. I'm not the right person to talk about paleo things much here, but then I would seriously like to mention that these mangroves, the oldest fossil of mangrove palm that we can date is of 75 million years ago. So that actually says that dinosaurs were living on this earth from 245 to 66 million years. If we consider that time period, then around 10 million years time was there when dinosaurs and mangroves were living together on this earth. So I just wanted to mention this to um, explain the importance of mangrove. That means it's not that similar species is thriving from that time till now, but species must be different. But then thing is that these mangroves have that much capability to evolve themselves and go through all kinds of disasters, and till they are saving themselves. So that is a big capacity, because we can hardly find out something which is living on this earth from that time since now. So they have evolved a lot. So their evolving capacities are not limited to only fruits or only roots. So everything is there. So we all know that pneumatophores are there, so they help in breathing. The most important thing is that they can thrive into salt water. So that is most important, because now we are saying that our coastal areas are going to be drowned, as IPCC is warning us again and again. So if that is the case, then these will be the trees which can actually uh, be there in future and help us. So this is important. Mangroves are very careful about their offsprings. So their fruits are very wonderfully designed, so it can float for a very long time. And once a fruit is there, it can be for 1 year, it can float to a safer place. And whenever it finds a a proper atmosphere, then only it plants, and then it germinates, and then finally the mangrove trees come up. So that is how it can save its future generations as well. So from mangroves, we practically we are benefited by several things, like direct benefit or indirect benefits. So direct benefits will give you all types of food items who eats non-veg, like fish, shrimps, or prawns, crabs, so many things. Then we also get lots and lots of medicines, and then timber, then edible other things, and shelter for a large number of threatened endangered species. And also it supports or saves from soil erosion. It protects the dikes, and the most important thing is it saves us from the cyclone, because it works as a buffer. And whenever tropical cyclones are there, especially the Sundarban area of West Bengal, I mean in India and Bangladesh. So the entire area, mangroves, they are working as a barrier. They are basically reducing the harming capacity of the cyclones, and they are saving lives and properties, so and other resources like agricultural field and all. So if it was not there, then definitely the destruction would have been much more than what it is today. So this is how it is protecting us also from tsunami as well, it said. So that is why we should actually be thinking of carefully saving them and increase them in number and in intensity. So lots of studies, they have shown that earlier whatever mangroves were there, nowadays the percentage has really reduced, because people are trying to capture the land, and with the increasing population, people are actually cutting the trees and conquering the islands those are there in Sundarban areas of West Bengal and in Bangladesh. Therefore, the vegetation is reducing in a serious manner, but we should be thinking of some kind of policy intervention or some kind of government interference to save these mangroves, because this actually helps in many things. Because if mangroves are not there, then salinity will be increased, sewage pollution will increase, cyclonic destruction will increase, and then whatever food items people are gathering, local people are gathering, they will also not be able to get that. And then lots of endangered species, which includes Royal Bengal tiger, the estuarine crocodile, or Salvador lizard, olive ridley turtle, gangetic dolphin. So all these important things, they will not be there anymore if we are not careful enough now. So there are lots of difficulties that local people face. That one most important thing is man-animal conflict. But then we have to understand that unless and until we are entering into their space, they suddenly does not come and attack you. So if we are not interfering into their business, they will also not do. So that itself is very important thing, that we should make local people aware of this fact, and we should give them with other opportunities, because if they have other job opportunities or other livelihood options, then definitely they will not go into the wild space for hunting or for other purposes. But then some people are there who are also going motivatedly, like encroachment and poaching activity is also there. So that we should take strict or stringent action against them. Then only these kind of things could be stopped. So the most important thing is that the policy intervention, or including all these things into the government policies, is important. Because in India, especially in Bengal and other village areas, it's very difficult to implement anything if it is not in there into the policies. So that would be all from my side today. So I would like to listen to other speakers.
Thank you, Dr. Shweta. Thank you so much. And as I'm also working in the mangroves of Sundarbans and Andamans and Gujarat, I completely agree with your statement that it should come up in policy, and the policy makers should consider the research which paleoclimatologists or ecologists, those who are working on mangroves regions, they should be considered, and the public awareness should be generated as much as. So with this, I could see Banerjee sir also attended today's webinar. Dear Banerjee sir, welcome Banerjee sir in this event. So with this, now moving ahead, we have 3 distinguished speakers for today's event, and the presentations will be followed by the discussion. And we are honored to have our first speaker, Professor Sanjay Deshmukh. So before he starts, I introduce him. Professor Deshmukh is one of India's widely acknowledged life scientists, as also academic thought leaders in higher education. Currently, he's a professor of life sciences at Mumbai University, and also served as vice chancellor of University of Mumbai. He's a recipient of 2 DSc degrees in 2017 and 2020 from Ram Manohar Lohia Awadh University, Uttar Pradesh, and University of Science and Technology, Meghalaya. His pioneering work on mangrove ecosystems led to establishment of a global network of mangrove genetic resources conservation centers. He also developed people-centered hotspot strategy for conservation planning through extensive field and study on sacred mangroves in Maharashtra state. He has intensive field research experience at national and international levels, spanning over 50 countries. He also raised say around 550 crore development grants for implementation of Mumbai University's master's plan. And he has published near about 200 research publications, and he guided several PhD and postdoctoral students. He is scientific consultant and policy advisor to several countries as well as intergovernmental agencies and government of India. He is also recipient of several prestigious awards and elected fellow of several scientific bodies. With these words, I request Professor Sanjay sir to please deliver his talk. He is going to talk on managing mangroves of Mumbai metropolitan region for disaster reduction. Professor Deshmukh, please.
Thank you so much and namaskar everybody. It's a great honor to be amongst all of you, and it's an honor as well to be given an opportunity to speak in front of so many stalwarts, and many of them have been responsible for my training in the field of mangroves. I can see Dr. Rajiv Nigam sir, and when I was a young researcher, I used to visit NIO, and I was very fortunate to have a PhD supervisor such as Dr. Professor Chafekar from Mumbai University, and he encouraged me to go to everybody who was working on mangroves and get that understanding and wisdom about how to look around and imbibe the entire aspect of mangrove ecosystems. And because of that, and of course my another supervisor, Dr. Karmakar, I was able to get that encouragement, and I made several trips. I can count them because going to Goa used to be an honor and privilege. And so far I have been to Goa more than 123 times. So you can imagine the quest for knowledge as well as meeting all those who taught me to look at mangrove ecosystems from a different perspective has helped me in probably being in front of you today and got this opportunity. This is a very important event, and I am very happy and particularly pleased that the representatives of Mangrove Society of India as well, like myself and Dr. Shilpa Pandey, who are members of the executive committee, are also represented on the very important topic of disaster risk reduction that mangroves play as an important role. The Birbal Sahani Institute of Paleosciences, as well as the NIDM, the National Institute of Disaster Management, they have taken a timely initiative in organizing this event very aptly. And I would like to express my grateful thanks to the director of BSIP, Dr. Vandana Prasad Madam, as well as the executive director of NIDM, Dr. Hassan Sir, in addition to Dr. R. Subramaniam from NIDM, who have been in the forefront of organizing this event. The convener and the chief coordinator, Dr. Shilpa Pandey, also is gratefully acknowledged. Besides several eminent luminaries, including Professor Anil Gupta, Professor Shweta Vaidya, and today's speakers besides me, Dr. Rachana Chandra, as well as Dr. Rama Subramaniam, one of my old-time friends, who is now working with the MS Swaminathan Research Foundation, where I started my research career after my PhD. He is also going to be one of the speakers. And almost 156 participants I can see on the screen. And it's a privilege to be able to share some of my experiences in front of all of you. As my predecessors, the speakers have already narrated very aptly and very eloquently the importance of mangrove ecosystems, not only to the nature, but also to the mankind in terms of their role, the ecological role, the physiological role, and the role where the two-thirds of the mankind, which is residing in the 60 kilometers belt from the coastal regions of the world, are directly or indirectly dependent on mangrove ecosystems. And therefore, it is very pertinent that a view for conservation and management of mangroves was taken globally. And as early as I recall, in late 70s, the UNESCO UNDP came together and implemented a project largely in the South and Southeast Asian region of the world, where we also have almost 80% of the total species of mangroves. And that was probably the reason why this project was initiated in the South and Southeast Asia of the world. And the then chief technical advisor, Dr. Marta Vanucci, who was with UNESCO, was given this responsibility. And she was posted in Delhi, the office of UNESCO in Delhi. And that is how the research at global level started. Interestingly, around same time in early 70s, the Mumbai Metropolitan Region Development Authority actually it came into force a little later, but the CIDCO, the City and Industrial Development Organization of Mumbai, the CIDCO, was established in 1971. And the major uh, terms of reference to CIDCO was to create a new city, probably a twin city to the mega city of Mumbai, so that the pressure on the city of Mumbai can be minimized. As all of us know, the city of Mumbai is an island city even today. And it is one of the most unique cities in the world where it hosts or houses about 2.5 crores of population, out of 13 crores of people in entire Maharashtra. But if you look at the size of the island of Mumbai, then it is hardly 604 square kilometer. And out of 604 square kilometer, again the uniqueness of the island city of Mumbai is that it's 1/6 of the geographical area, that is 104 square kilometer of area is under the Sanjay Gandhi National Park. There is no city in the world where 1/6 of its area geographically is protected as a national park. It also is unique in a sense that the population of Mumbai, now 2021 census is not yet out, but it is already more than the entire population of Australia. So you can imagine the magnitude of density of population, which is almost 55 to 60,000 people per square kilometer. And for a region like this, if you are including the MMR, that is the Mumbai Metropolitan Region, because the adjoining district of Thane and now newly formed district of Palghar, and the adjoining on the eastern side, that is Raigad district. So parts of these three districts are also included in the metropolitan region of Mumbai, which is about 3,000 square kilometers. What I'm trying to say here is the entire metropolitan region, which includes the island of Mumbai, and the pressure of population upon the island is so much that it is only an imagination for everybody. If a tsunami-like disaster takes place for the city or metropolitan region of Mumbai, then it is estimated that almost 64,000 crores of property loss is envisaged. And it was also estimated if the tsunami hits at a speed of 700 kilometers per hour, within 15 minutes, I think 1/3 of the population of Mumbai will be directly affected. And that is how the magnitude of this kind of disaster can be envisaged. There are scientific evidences which state that the risk of tsunami to Mumbai is minimal, but nevertheless, because of the changing situations of climate and the warming of the globe, any calamity can take place, and that is where we will have to be prepared to face any disaster that may uh, cause loss of life and the property. And with that view, about 50 years ago, when CIDCO was established, it looked at adjoining areas which were low-lying areas, which were under the influence of tidal water, but they were very well managed by the traditional communities like fishermen and the agriculturists. And they were in a position to build bunds to stop the tidal water wherever required. And wherever it was necessary for them to go for capture fishery, they developed sluice gates. And the entire coastline of Navi Mumbai, what we see today, almost 20 kilometers, was protected by these earthen bunds. In fact, this was the model which was implemented effectively by the country like Holland, where the entire country is below sea level. And they have been able to build a cement concrete wall along the coast much higher than the highest high tide level. And it has been protected to the extent that the entire city, even though it is below the sea level, it is protected. And based on that, the MMR region's development was planned. However, the bunds of cement, concrete, or stones were not actually implemented in every part of the coastal areas of MMR, but partially they were there, and the traditional urban earthen bunds were continued. But that created more and more problems because the entire MMR could not be protected periodically or even perpetually with the help of these traditional knowledge systems, because the maintenance of these systems was not envisaged nor was taken as a responsibility by the state government. And because of that, the MMR, when we talk about reduction of risk with respect to disaster, then the planning was perfect, but it did not really take place to the extent that one would envisage. And therefore, the time from when I was directly involved in researching the coastal areas of MMR, particularly from 1986, when I started my research for my PhD, I realized that one will have to look at the five-pronged approach if you're talking about coming out with a strategy for disaster risk reduction. And the five-pronged strategy was conservation, classification, evaluation, restoration, and utilization. What it means by conservation was looking at the entire MMR region. And as all of us know, the city of Mumbai being a very sensitive area as far as the defense mechanism is concerned, till late 80s, we did not
Professor
have access.
Deshmukh, sorry
Yeah,
to interrupt.
yeah.
Professor Deshmukh, your video, I think so. Can you switch on?
I'm not.
Uh,
Uh,
uh, Dr. Shilpa, we can see and hear him clearly.
yeah, I
Okay,
think
let me
I'm
start.
seen on my screen.
Please continue, sir.
Okay. So what I'm trying to say here is that the MMRDA's conservation uh, approach was not really leading to a conclusive state, because the accessibility to the satellite images those days was a major problem because of the strategic location of Mumbai and the defense mechanisms as far as the military and the navy is concerned. It was not accessible. So the NRSA or the French satellites, the maps of Mumbai were not available. So we were constrained by modern technology which we could adopt for studying these areas. So we adopted ecological methods for mapping mangroves of MMR DA, that is MMR region. Specifically, the 4,000 acres contiguous patch of mangroves, which is located in Vikhroli, and which is also under the ownership of Sunabai Pirocha Godrej Trust or Foundation, which is one of the very unique philanthropic organization in the world, where despite the ownership of such a huge land under its possession, it has preserved it for now more than 125 years for just maintaining it as a green patch of the city or the green lungs of the city of Mumbai. And it has helped tremendously in terms of what we call it as sequestration of carbon dioxide, because mangrove ecosystems are second best sequesters of carbon dioxide after bamboo. And it has really helped in maintaining the balance of oxygen and carbon dioxide of the city of Mumbai by such a huge effort of conservation of one of the largest contiguous patches of mangroves, which is under the private ownership. I was very fortunate to start my PhD work in this particular area with the support from the Sunabai Pirocha Godrej Foundation, which helped me look at the MMR region with respect to its conservation and mapping with the help of ecological techniques. The mapping was done, the different areas which were open, the different areas which were under different types or percentages of height and density of canopy. were identified, and we were in a position to map the MMR with the help of these ecological techniques. In addition to that, what we looked at is that what we call it as anticipatory research. Unless we look at future, we will not be able to plan anything for facing the challenges of the future. And that was one of the most important criteria based on which this five-pronged strategy was developed. And we were in a position to not only look at the conservation aspect by mapping the areas, by identifying the gaps where the areas were conducive of supporting mangroves, but they were exposed to no vegetation. They were just exposed because of the overexploitation of mangrove areas by either local people or by the developers for want of creating new spaces for habitation of human beings. And that actually led to an effort of not only classifying the mangrove and their associate species, but undertake the entire survey of the coastal Maharashtra, which encompasses 720 kilometers, and about 57 creeks and estuaries are located along the coast of Maharashtra. We were in a position to identify species which were phenotypically better and were able to collect seedlings of those species from different locations and plant them in a large scale nursery. One of the first efforts, in addition to the efforts taken by the Social Forestry Department as early as in 1986, after the experiments in Andaman and in Goa, where the first nurseries of mangroves were established under the auspices from the expertise available with NIO, particularly the Biological Oceanography Division, which was headed by Dr. Parulekar and Dr. Untawale, who later on became the head of the division as well as the deputy director. And he also contributed so much to the conservation and management of mangroves, not only of India but abroad, throughout the world. He was recognized as Mangrove Man of India. Unfortunately, he's no more, but he was the person who also established as a founding secretary the Mangrove Society of India, which I was joint secretary at that time. And it was a privilege to work with all such scientists who were able to provide guidelines both at the physical, chemical, and biological oceanographic levels to look at mangroves which were on the boundary of land and sea, the dividing line between land and sea. So this MMRDA effort, we were in a position to expand to the extent of not only conservation but classification, looking at different species, developing nurseries of species of different types or same species but different phenotypic characteristics, and develop a kind of resources center. And then we looked at how do we plant these regenerated, naturally regenerated as well as artificially developed mangrove seedlings. I mean artificially means planting them into the nursery and then transplanting them into the field. So from that point of view, we were in a position to look at the restoration aspect. And that was the time when Dr. M.S. Swaminathan, the then president of the International Union for Conservation of Nature and Natural Resources, who had just superannuated from the International Rice Research Institute. And as all of us know, he is also called the father of Green Revolution. He had a chance to visit mangroves of Vikhroli in 1988. And he looked at the efforts of the Sonabai Pirocha Godrej Foundation and spoke about genetic conservation and genetic resources conservation of mangrove species. The UNESCO and the UNDP projects, which had provided leadership to the mangrove conservation and management program, was added with this new dimension of identifying potential of mangroves to look at their adaptability to the salinity as well as the adaptability to the submersion, because at the time of high tide, all the mangroves are partially submerged and then they are exposed to land or to air at the time of low tide. So this concept of adaptation to climate change and establishment of transgenic plants with the help of mangroves by identification of salt tolerant genes and transfer them into other species which are landward species was a concept that was originated in 1988. And then rest is the history, because the MS Swaminathan Foundation, where I started my career and I was the second employee of the foundation, we were in a position to develop transgenic rice by transplanting or transferring the genes which were drawn from species like Avicennia marina, and we were in a position to transplant them, and we made the rice salt tolerant with the same kind of productivity levels. In addition to that, what we call it as plantation efforts in Mumbai, in the MMR region, we were in a position to provide guidelines to the World Bank, and we brought almost 4,000 acres of uh, land under mangroves, and most of it was available in the area at Vikhroli, where a lot of open areas were there because of the raising of the land over the period of time due to cutting of mangroves, and they were not replaced earlier times by the communities which were using the mangroves, and they still use the mangroves for the fuel wood purpose. So the disaster risk reduction effort started as early as in 1980s in MMR region by SIDCO through MMRDA and through the Bombay Natural History Society. Subsequently, I joined the BNHS and worked there for 4 years as a principal scientist. And many of our major programs were revolving around the revival of mangroves and managing them by providing guidelines to the MMR. One of the efforts with the help of modern technology which came into force in mid 90s, where we were in a position to look at the satellite images and prepare a management plan for the Mumbai's metropolitan region, which provided not only the management plan but also looked at what we call it as change detection studies. So the mangrove areas which were there in MMR region in early 90s, what was the status in say 1998? So over a period of 8 years time, what we noticed is despite the fact that people from NGOs and very many conservationists were envisaging the loss of mangroves in the 8 year duration, where the majority development, the infrastructure development of MMR was undergoing, MMR region was undergoing, we were in a position to prove with the help of satellite images that the mangroves of MMR had actually increased 2.5 times than the original area which they were occupying in early 90s, particularly in 1991. And one of the major reasons was the reclamation that was happening for laying of the railway lines, for creating a railway line between Thane and Navi Mumbai, like Belapur, and laying a railway line from Chembur to Vashi, Navi Mumbai. A lot of accretion took place in the Navi Mumbai side and in the MMR region because of this reclamation activity, and a huge area of land which subsequently got inundated partially, and it got influence of the tidal water periodically every day. They were occupied through the succession process of mangrove development, and that is how 2.5 times increase in the mangrove cover was envisaged and was actually noticed and proven. So the MMR region where disaster risk reduction is talked about, mangroves have played a very important role, and various scientists, including the scientists from BNHS, from the University of Mumbai. I was also working with an NGO at that time, the Godrej Foundation, and the scientists from or scientific minded foresters from the forest department of Maharashtra and Goa, where I would like to name few people: late Dr. Arvind Raddi, late Dr. Arvind Akte from the Agarkar Institute, and Shri P.V. Sawant, one of the principal chief conservator of forests of central government cadre, the union territory cadre, who is now settled in Goa. They were all responsible for looking at the MMR region at different times and provide solutions to really look at evaluation as well as the restoration aspect. And when we talk about management aspect, the management of MMR with respect to the mangroves was periodically guided by these organizations. And I was very fortunate to play a very important role in with the help of my tutors as well as my collaborators at different levels, and I was able to contribute significantly through research projects for not only planning the development in the MMR, looking at the extent of mangroves, the elevation of the creeks and estuaries which are surrounding the island of Mumbai, and also present within the MMR, that is Mumbai metropolitan region. And we were in a position to provide guidelines to the Mumbai Metropolitan Region Development Authority by way of periodically monitoring the mangroves, periodically monitoring the developmental processes, periodically monitoring the effect that they can take place. The mangroves are also very important from the point of view of their existence for ages, for time immemorial, where people have preserved them like sacred groves. Now, sacred groves is a totally different concept, but in the coastal areas, people have traditionally preserved some of the patches of mangroves with the belief that there is an element of God or some supernatural power which is attached to it. And with that concept, they were in a position to preserve it for the last 100, 200 years. And they are also evident in MMR, where we could identify a few sacred groves which are comprising of mangrove trees. And that also has contributed to maintaining the forest cover of mangroves. The experiment of MS Swaminathan Research Foundation, where I worked for 5 years, and we had developed a concept of mangrove management, what we call it as joint mangrove management. And one of my colleagues who was in charge of that activity, initially, of course, I was leading the coastal systems research department, but ultimately that division was having different categories, and Dr. Selvam, who recently superannuated from the Swaminathan Foundation, was heading the restoration program, and we were in a position to develop ecological engineering techniques. Besides only looking at the suitable areas of plantation, we were in a position to develop certain locations by ecological engineering, and we were in a position to create new areas which were earlier under mangroves, but they had become above the high tide line. So by manipulating engineering technically, we were in a position to create some of those areas which would become conducive for mangrove plantations, and almost 15,000 hectares of land along the entire eastern part of the country were brought under plantation with the help of involvement of local people under the joint mangrove management program. I'm sure Dr. Ram Subramanian will be talking about it. But what I'm trying to say is that India has been very fortunate, where the implementation of global programs which started from UNDP, UNESCO, which was timely and technically supported by organizations like NIO, which contributed a great deal in spreading its specialization and providing guidelines to the countries adjoining us in the Southeast Asian region, which was led by Dr. Untawale, Dr. Tanaji Jagtap, Dr. Saida Wafar, Dr. Moinuddin Wafar, and people like Dr. Rajiv Nigam and many others like Raghu Kumar and Lata Raghu Kumar and others. Every aspect of mangrove ecosystem was actually responsible for contributing a great deal towards understanding the ecosystem itself. It was not just the trees above the ground, but an affiliated flora and fauna along with the mangrove trees came into actually picture because of the conglomeration of these experts and people with wisdom, which looked at mangroves from a different perspective. And I was very fortunate to get that exposure through the scientists of NIO. And of course, I still continue to be advising the MMR DA, particularly SIDCO also, because the second international airport, which again had a 165 hectares of mangroves, which was in the planned development area, we were able to provide guidelines to develop a kind of conglomeration of mangrove genetic resources conservation center, the concept which we had implemented throughout the world in early 90s, the time when people were not talking about climate change and global warming. IPCC also was established in late 80s. But this was a kind of anticipatory research through mangroves, I believe, that was very helpful to overcome the problems and challenges that we are facing in the 21st century. The research was done in early 90s, which has helped us to provide solution. And therefore, the disaster risk reduction, the initiative of the Ministry of Environment and Forests of the Government of India, which was through its vision able to establish the National Mangrove Committee as early as in 1991, and also bring in the CRZ notification, which finally got into place in 2020 after 25 amendments. But I was able to contribute in addition to my other responsibilities to the policy level as well. And therefore, I feel the Birbal Sahani Institute of Paleo Sciences, which has pioneered research in paleobotany, and now, of course, in various aspects of science, and the National Institute of Disaster Management, which is blessed with the people at the helm of the affairs in terms of scientists, policymakers, and hardcore foresters as well. I think collectively we can do a lot in taking India ahead, which can provide guidelines to the world as it has provided in the past with respect to the disaster risk management. I'm really grateful for the opportunity, and I hope this narrative was probably better than only showing slides and showing some experimental work, which I'm sure I'll get an opportunity to show at a different platform in future in association with NIDM, NIO, as well as the BSIP. I'm particularly grateful to Dr. Shilpa Pandey for identifying me to be part of this gathering. And I'm also grateful to all the organizations which have taught me and given me some wisdom which I'm still able to use by learning every day. Thank you very much, madam. Namaskar.
Thank you, Professor Deshmukh, for your wonderful talk. And I hope you all enjoyed this outstanding talk. Undoubtedly, Professor Deshmukh is a brilliant speaker and he never disappoints his audience. So thank you once again, Professor Deshmukh.
Thank you so much.
Now we have our next speaker. I take this opportunity to introduce our next speaker, Dr. R.R. Subramaniam. Dr. R.R. Subramaniam is serving as Director, Coastal System Research Program in M.S. Swaminathan Research Foundation, Chennai. After completing his doctorate in the Center of Advanced Study in Botany, University of Madras, he joined M.S. Swaminathan Research Foundation in 1996 as a scientist, mangrove biologist. As a mangrove biologist, he has carried out extensive biophysical surveys in the Godavari and Krishna mangrove wetlands of Andhra Pradesh. He is instrumental in executing the mangrove restoration activities jointly with the stakeholders such as the local community, forest department staff, and NGOs in Andhra Pradesh. And he restored, say, around 900 hectares of mangroves. His books on mangrove identification manure, mangrove nursery, and mangrove restoration techniques were utilized by the forest department field staff. He has trained a large number of community members, PRIs, NGOs, and forest department staff on the mangrove silviculture practices. Recently, he established a mangrove genetics garden with 25 mangrove saplings collected from east and west coast of India, jointly with the Andhra Pradesh Forest Department in the Pronged Wildlife Sanctuary. He is also working on halophytes and has established agronomic practices to grow halophytes in saline soils using salt water. He is a member of the Wetland Management Committee and the Red Cell Committee of the State of Andhra Pradesh. He has participated in several national and international training programs, seminars, and presented the work of the foundation. He has over 20 peer-reviewed publications in journals and co-authored 5 books and 10 chapters in his credits. So with this, now I request Dr. R.R. Subramaniam to deliver his talk.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Dr. Shilpa, and thank you for providing this opportunity. Respected Vandana Prasad Madam, Director BSIP, then Sri Taj Hassan, Executive Director of NIDM, other eminent speakers, my previous speaker, Dr. Sanjay Deshmukh, and other dignitaries. First of all, I thank everybody for providing this opportunity. And I will be having a presentation, I will be sharing that.
Dr. R.R. Subramaniam, sir, is visible, Dr. Shweta? Or I'm not able to?
No, he is not visible. Sir, you are not visible.
Sir, please.
Oh, now I am visible, I think.
Yes.
Right. Thank you, sir.
My presentation is visible?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. So, as many speakers have told about the coastline of India. We have around 7,000 kilometers of length, of which a large community is residing. More than 250 million people are residing along the coast. Some of the vulnerable coastal areas are in both west and east coast, Mumbai, then Kutch, southern Kerala, and Lakshadweep Islands in the west coast.
सर
And
आपकी वॉइस स्लो आ रही है सर, थोड़ा तेज बोलिए.
yeah, just a minute, I will increase my. The vulnerable locations along the west coast are Mumbai coast, Kutch region, southern Kerala, and Lakshadweep. And in the east coast, the deltas, mainly the Ganges, Kaveri in Tamil Nadu, Krishna and Godavari in east coast are highly vulnerable. About 7 million coastal families, mostly poor, vulnerable farming and fishing community, are being affected by disasters, particularly the sea level rise, then cyclones, saline water intrusion, salinization of aquifers. So our coast is experiencing, mostly the east coast. Recently, the west coast is also experiencing cyclones of super cyclone and other cyclones of very high intensity. And the Southern Asia Disaster Report has ranked our coast as a highly vulnerable coast. It has ranked at 9. So these are some of the list of disasters like cyclone and tsunami we are experienced in our coast. Actually, in 1977, we had a cyclone in Divishima. At that time, it was not recorded as super cyclone, but the tidal water, the storm surge, has reached more than 20-25 kilometers inland, and near the coast, the water level was about 32 feet. So it has devastated the entire Krishna Delta, affected more than 10,000 people, official record, but the unofficially people are telling that the death toll was more than 15,000. Then we had large cyclones, but due to our advanced alert systems, the human loss has come down, but the property loss and other infrastructure loss is still very high because of the intensive cyclones. And 2004 we had tsunami, and the Tamil Nadu coast has been severely affected, apart from the Andaman coast. These are some of the storm surges which have happened in the Indian coast. If you see in the table the below, the Bangladesh, Odisha, and Myanmar had experienced for about a surge of about 10 to 12 meters high. So the saline water has intruded, the wind velocity has also damaged a lot. So in Bangladesh, more than 3,000 people were killed during 1977 cyclone. Similarly, in 1991, the death toll was about 138,000 people were killed. So recently in 1999, we had a super cyclone in Odisha. Around 10,000 people were killed, and the tidal waves were about 7 to 8 meters. And then Nargis in 2018, Nargis, the death toll was about 1.38 lakh. So it shows how the storm surges and cyclones are affecting our coastal community, and the climate change is actually enhancing the frequency as well as the intensity of these cyclones. So as nature has provided mangroves as one of the important ecosystems to provide both ecological security as well as livelihood security to the coastal communities. So as Dr. Sanjay has already talked about the carbon sequestration potential as well as the other benefits. So it actually plays a major role in reducing these impacts, and I will be presenting some of the case studies in the coming slides. Storm surge is actually movement of seawater due to low pressure as well as the wind velocity. So some of the major cyclones, the saline water intrudes more than 20 to 30 kilometers inland, affecting the farming as well as other livelihood assets. So, for example, 7 meters of high storm surge, which has crossed Bangladesh coast in 1991, has killed more than 1.38 lakh people, and the wind velocity was around 225 kilometers per hour. Then mangrove system is one of the very effective, cost-effective soft structure than the other hard engineering structures, because hard engineering structures need to be maintained. A lot of groins or seawall have to be built, and the expense will be very high. If you want to build a 1 kilometers of seawall, you have to invest around 17 crores. So if you have a natural mangrove ecosystem with about 0.5 to 1 kilometer wide, it will be protecting better than that seawall. So if you see the mangrove root system, it is one of the important root systems. It have both lateral roots as well as aerial roots, which will find firmly with the sediments. Because of that lateral roots, these plants are able to withstand the wind speed of about 200 kilometers per hour. So apart from that, it helps the plants to get oxygen, because a lot of nematophores and silt roots are there, because these mangroves are all highly inundated areas, having more than 6 meters. So in Sundarbans and Gujarat, we will be having tidal amplitude of about 6 meters. So it will be inundated to 3 to 4 hours inside the water. So the roots will not be getting any water, oxygen. So these aerial roots will help to get oxygen. Apart from that, these root system will provide a lot of food materials as well as protection of juveniles from predation. So I started my work in 1996 in Andhra Pradesh. These are the satellite images of Krishna as well as Godavari. Left side is Godavari, right side is Krishna estuary. You can see the degraded patches. These are the degraded patches. We started our work in 1996. Both Forest Department and MSSR have initiated participatory mangrove management, as Dr. Sanjay has told about the joint mangrove management. We initiated work in 1996, and now if you see, we'll be showing the images later, and completely it has been restored, and I will be speaking on the restoration technique as well as some of the case studies. So we started our work in 1990 in Pichavaram. At that time, the mangrove wetlands were highly degraded, and because of both man-made as well as natural causes, these mangrove forests were felled for the fuel wood requirement of the local community, as well as the other industries like brick lanes and other things. So people were using the timber for firewood, then they were using the land for grazing. There are feral cattle in Krishna and Godavari, where about 2,000 population of cattle will be residing in the mangrove forest. They will be destroying some of the saplings and other things. Then changes in land use. Aquaculture is one of the major threat, and not only in India but also in all Asian countries. So it has actually reduced the mangrove extent significantly in these countries. Then there were conversions for agriculture and industries. Then changes in the topography. There's a levee formation along the river creeks. So the tidal water may not be inundating those areas, and a lot of sediments were deposited, and it has become elevated. So tidal water flow is very much required for the mangroves to grow very well. Since there is a change in the topography, and the tidal water flow is very much minimal, and because of that, large areas of mangroves were killed. Then some of the cyclones in Devasima we had a 1977 cyclone in Krishna wetland. So then recently we had a Gaja cyclone in 2018 Muthupet, Tamil Nadu. Then Nargis. These cyclones actually damaged a lot of mangroves, and some of the mangroves have the ability to cope up and coming back. But the cyclone in Muthupet in 2018, since the density was very less, large number of trees were completely uprooted, and it has reduced the mangrove extent by about 3 square kilometers, and it has not been till now covered. Then climate change, increase in temperature will affect the water availability. The evapotranspiration will be very high. Due to that, mangroves will be very stunted. So these are some of the pictures of how the domestic people will be using the mangroves for their needs. Then agriculture and aquaculture as well as industries are the major players converting the mangroves for other uses. And this is exactly the imagery of Muthupet before and after Gaja cyclone. You can see the in the circle, if you see the red color portion, which has been completely destroyed by the cyclone, and the coastal areas are highly prone to erosion because lack of proper flow of river water, because river water brings a lot of sediments due to construction of dam and other things. Sediment flow into the ocean has been highly cut off, and due to that, a lot of erosion is happening place. And this is one of the examples of highly evapotranspiration, how it affected the mangroves in Pichavaram. Large areas of mangroves were affected by the change in temperature as well as the tidal amplitude. So, Emma Swaminathan Research Foundation initiated mangrove conservation work along with the community as well as other stakeholders in 1990. We have identified the degraded areas involving the local community as well as using the satellite images. So we have mobilized the community to take up mangrove restoration by cutting these canals, because these areas were highly saline areas because of lack of tidal water flow. So the pore water salinity, if you assess, it will be more than 150 ppt. So the mangrove plants like Abyssinia marina, that is one of the highly hardy species, which can withstand about 90 parts per thousand. Beyond that, only a few halophytes can grow. These mangroves need salinity between 25 to 35. Then these mangroves can flourish very well. So in order to reduce this soil salinity, we have cut canals like this to facilitate tidal water flow. Actually, during high tide, the water enters inside the area and it recedes during the low tide. And we have planted mangrove saplings along the canals. I will be showing the pictures in coming slides. So this is how the local community is involved to restore mangroves. They will be getting both benefits, like they will be getting wages as well as a lot of ecosystem services will be provided by the mangroves to them. So this is how the local community are involved in planting as well as managing the mangroves. This is how this is a 5-year-old plant. We have around 3 meters in height. So this is the aerial photography of the restored area. You can see all along the canals and in between the canals are also slowly naturally mangroves are coming up. So this is the satellite imagery. You can very well see in the 1996 the area were highly degraded, and if you see in 2019 it has been improved a lot. Both the density as well as the extent of mangroves have been improved by both restoration by Forest Department as well as MSSR. This is Krishna Delta, where during 1996 the mangroves were about 7,500 hectares of mangroves, but it has been increased by almost 12,000. Now it is increased by more than 5,000 hectares. So both due to natural regeneration as well as restoration by both forest department and us. This is the imagery of Pichavaram, Tamil Nadu. In 1988, the mangroves were hardly present. Only 400 hectares of mangroves were there, but now it has been doubled. More than 900 hectares of mangroves are there. So I'll be showing some of the case studies. This is a super cyclone. This is a study done by Saudamani Das and Vincent. It has been published. So Orissa, because already pointed out by me, the eastern coast is highly vulnerable to disasters, and Orissa, the intensity of cyclone has been increased for the last 3 to 4 decades. If you see, the frequency as well as the intensity has been increased. And during the last decade, Orissa has witnessed 52 cyclones. So these were the pictures taken from that paper by Swaminathan Das. In 1990, if you see the left side image, a lot of mangroves were there along the coast, and 1999 super cyclone has crossed near Jagatsinghpur. So since the mangroves were cleared, the super cyclone has come and it has affected the entire region. Even up to Cuttack, the entire area was affected, and this is the inundation of water in these districts. So she made a comparative study and found because of cyclone, 392 people were killed. If mangroves of 1990 were there will not be any human loss. So that is one of her interference, telling that the mangroves played a major role. Since the mangrove area has now been reduced by 52%, the death toll also increased. So mangroves are very important. Similarly, in second site, there were about 217 deaths. So which have been affected by if the mangroves of 1990 were there will not be any mangrove, there will not be any death. And coming to tsunami, we had Indian Ocean tsunami in 2004. It has killed more than 2.27 people in Indonesia, and the other. This is the coast of Tamil Nadu. We have witnessed cyclone, that tsunami in 2004. So it has affected 13 coastal districts. Among them, 3 were highly affected, and more than 8,000 people were killed, and more than 10 lakh people, both farming and fishing community, lost their livelihood because a lot of soil has been brought in and it has damaged a lot of houses, as well as the agricultural land become highly saline, and it's very difficult to get crop for at least 2 to 3 years. A lot of efforts were made to reclaim those soils, and MSSRF has done a lot of work with the coastal communities to bring their livelihoods back. So these are the villages. The villages very close to the coast where mangroves were not there were highly affected during the tsunami, because the tidal wave of about 4 to 5 meters.
And when mangrove diversity increases over a period of time, the area also increases. Okay. And then there will be areas where these mangroves will be able to colonize them at a landward fringe. Okay, so that is what exactly has happened. If you see the estimates of Orissa in past 25 or 30 years, I should say, ever since this joint forest management initiative has been taken up in Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, Orissa and places like that, the mangrove cover has increased among all the states and union territories. Orissa has increased 8 square kilometers of mangrove as per the FSI report 2021. Okay, so because they are facing, or they are actually experiencing good rainfall, and that is how it is one of the factors, climatic factors, I should say, which is actually helping the mangrove to grow. But then there is a rider also. Yes. So basically what here is, whatever these results or the research people have done, basically it is based on a very small level. Only few areas have been surveyed. So at a larger scale, all these comparisons have not been made. Okay. So now the next factor is the temperature, how temperature will be affecting the mangrove. Okay. So basically at a global average surface temperature would increase, okay, by 22,000 Celsius. Okay, so next couple of years, 100 years, the projections are the temperature is going to increase. So when this temperature increases, what happens is the greenhouse gases are there, they will trap heat. Okay, then they will increase the heat. So what happens is when the temperature is increasing up to a certain level, okay, up to a certain level, mangrove species composition, phenological patterns will change, but then the productivity will increase. But beyond that optimum level or a threshold, I should say, if the temperature increases too much, the mangroves cannot sustain and they will lead to mortality. Okay. Now I am coming to the carbon dioxide aspect. So how the carbon dioxide would affect, the presence of this greenhouse gas would affect these mangroves basically. So basically this has a direct effect on the mangroves. Okay. So this carbon dioxide gas would increase the productivity of some of the species of mangroves. So if you look at the carbon sequestration potential, if you do some surveys, whether destructive or if you go for some allometric equations, you can see that there is some value, okay, specific value is there, calorific value for each of these species is there. So based on that, we can see which species will be more effective and productive and which will not be, okay. And then if the carbon dioxide level is increasing, so what would happen is the growth rate will also increase, okay. Why? Because these plants need carbon dioxide and there will be efficient regulation of water losses also. But if there is a reduced rainfall, even if the carbon dioxide elevation is happening, but if the rainfall is reduced, what would happen? The mangroves will come under stress in those areas, and then over a period of time, it will impact its ecology, and then they would die over a period of time. Now, there are estimates about the ocean circulation patterns also, but then there is no clear evidence, like I should say research or evidence as of now being done. So I'll just skip this slide quickly. Now coming to the human responses. This is one of the very most, I should say, important factor in terms of the existence of the mangroves for us and we for them actually. So basically there will be an increase in the construction of sea walls. So what would happen is, as I have shown in the Jagtap and Nadeli's diagram, what the thing is, when this construction is happening, the mangroves will tend to move towards the land, okay. And what would happen is, when this happens, there will be coastal erosion also involved. Okay, likewise, because of the human responses, what would happen is areas where the rainfall is less, but the temperature is high. So what would happen? They will be requiring more groundwater extraction. They need water because rainfall is not there, temperatures are very high. So when the drinking water is involved in that, drinking purpose or for the irrigation purpose, what would happen is there will be an increase in the relative sea level rise of the mangrove surface. Okay, then what happens when there is an increase in the relative sea level rise and there is no rainfall, there is no source of fresh water? That means there is no option of sediment elevation. So when there is no option of sediment elevation, what would happen? Because of we human beings in such areas, drier areas, it will lead the mangroves to vulnerability. It will affect its ecology over a period of time. Now, I'm just almost done. Give me 5 more minutes. I know all of you are very hungry. So now we look at the adaptations, because we have heard about the responses. So what are the adaptations there, or what are the adaptation options there? So in order to increase the resistance and the resilience of these mangroves, what the thing is, there should be no regret reduction of stresses. Okay, so there should not be any filling activity happening. There should not be any aquaculture activity happening in the areas where the diversity is huge or is facing some crisis. Okay, because I know this is one point where I should say many of us will be debating about. Okay, so there have to be, apart from that, there have to be a regional monitoring network. This is what exactly was being told by I think one of our speakers in the morning. Okay, then there have to be outreach and education programs to ensure these mangroves are being sustained. Okay, they are being conserved and restored. Likewise, there has to be representation and replica for these systems, and some of these should also fall under the protected area networks. We have it for other parts, but why not for the mangroves? Okay, so this is so. Now, if you look at the disaster risk reduction, wetlands are the ones. It is the ECO-DRR, ecosystem-based disaster risk reductions. There are global agreements which say that we have to conserve the biodiversity, ensuring that the wetlands are conserved. If we are able to conserve our wetlands, we will be able to conserve the ecological biodiversity, I should say. Okay, so there are different conventions, agreements also, frameworks also there at a global level. We have the Ramsar Convention, we have the Convention on Biological Diversity, Paris Agreement, Sendai Framework on DRR, and then we also have the SDG goals, which talks about the importance of these wetlands and conservation of water and these mangroves. Okay. Now, this is just a glimpse of what exactly is the present status of mangroves in India. As per the latest survey of FSI, Forest Survey of India 2021, we have a mangrove cover of almost 4,992 square kilometers. Okay, so we have it across 9 coastal states and 4 union territories. Definitely, as I have said, there are variations in the rainfall, there are variations at a geological setting, so you cannot compare apples with oranges. Correct. So that is what exactly is happening. We cannot compare the Sundarban mangroves with the western part of the mangroves. We cannot compare Andaman mangroves with the Sundarban or Andaman mangroves with the western part. Okay, because of the spatial variations. They have like huge climatic variations. So some are receiving 317 millimeters of rainfall annually, whereas Andaman is receiving 3,200 millimeters of rainfall. So when the rainfall is there, the diversity is huge. That is what I have explained. Okay, but then in India, because of the joint forest management, there are states like Tamil Nadu, West Bengal, Orissa, where the mangrove cover has expanded, has increased in past 42 or in past 42 or 40 years, like that. So this is the current status, I should say, and we have a coastline of almost 7,500, 16.6 kilometers. Now, I have also done a meta-analysis. I have taken rather from one of the presentations, actually. So basically, there's a meta-analysis. When we look at the mangroves, till 2004, many of us were not talking about, maybe institutes related to the marine sciences were working on this, but then most of us were not even knowing what exactly these mangroves are. But ever since this tsunami happened in 2004, what has happened is the number of publications with respect to this mangroves cover in India, whether it is their ecosystem services, the threats, or anything like that, climatic change, carbon sequestration potential, biodiversity, flora, fauna, anything we talk about has exceeded like anything. So major publications are actually coming since 2004 only. Earlier to that, we were so ignorant about this. But then it is the time that we must conserve this ecosystem. So when we look at the direct climate change, okay, so the thing here is this becomes very much less significant actually when we relate this SLR, sea level rise. Like we have the temperature rise. What would happen? It will help in productivity. If there is carbon dioxide increase, what would happen? It will help in the productivity again, and then it will also expand their ranges. Okay, they will be able to move towards other areas also. So what here I want to say is there has to be an amalgamation of lots and lots of things. There has to be a multiple approach. We have to have a synergistic effect, and we have to have different factors which affect this climate change, and we need to study all of them. And then we need to create some models where we can study the stresses which these mangrove ecosystems actually are facing, multiple stresses, I should say. So now this slide basically talks about what would happen when the sea level rise is there. Okay, so there are places when the sea level rise will happen at a low rate, maybe 9 centimeters per 100 years. Okay, so what would happen is only few species of mangroves will be there in next 100 years. Only few species of mangroves will be there which will be vulnerable. Okay, so those areas are there. But there are certain areas where the SLR would be medium in rate. So in those cases, what would happen? Medium means 9 to 12 centimeters per 100 years. Okay. So what would happen is these species will become more vulnerable, and then majority of the species in those areas will face risk of extinction. They will not go extinct, but then they will face the risk of extinction. Okay. Likewise, the areas which are actually suffering from high rate of SLR, they are the ones which would actually face high species loss in short span of time. Okay, so these are some of the projections and studies being done by other researchers. So at last, I would like to conclude that mangroves till date, we say they are highly resilient, but then what would happen in next 100 years, we also need to look at. Okay, so they may not be able to cope up with the next coming decades, whether they're anthropogenic activities or the SLRs. So basically SLR also, it is a relative SLR. I should say the regional level SLR, which is actually one of the greatest threat to these mangroves. We need not look at a global level. We have to start at a regional level, actually. So these mangroves will not be able to keep pace with these relative SLR, because if we look at the drier areas, there are no fresh water. Okay, a typical supply of fresh water is there. So over a period of time, there won't be any mangroves existing. So we need to study them now, and then there are predictions which say that because of this relative SLR, almost 0.2% of the mangroves are being lost in the Pacific Islands. Okay, annual reduction, I should say, is there. So what we tend to do is we should conserve these mangroves, because if these reduced mangroves area is happening, if the area is reduced, what would happen? It would also affect the threat to we human beings. Why? Because they help us with their the coastal bioshield, they help us from tsunami and other storms or any natural hazards. Okay, so coastal planning also has to be there, synergistic approach has to be there, regional monitoring networks have to be there, and then of course there has to be an accurate prediction of the changes which these coastal ecosystems are facing. It need not be like, okay, this would happen in next these many years. So these projections or the predictions need to be very thorough, very accurate. Why? Because these projections are the ones which will help us in enabling the site planning. Okay, and because we have a very limited time, so what would happen is the site planning has to be done now and has to be done efficiently. So that is how this role of predictions becomes very important in these coastal ecosystems. So with this, I would like to end. These are some of the glimpses of our fieldwork done actually in Gujarat part. This is like my team with us. And then this is how you can see some of the areas which we have tried to explore. We do in other parts of the country also. And yeah, thank you all. Thank you so much for your patient listening.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rachna Chandra, for delivering a very interesting and very, I could say, very enlightening talk, I would say, for all the participants, those who are listening, the mangroves. And beautifully, you have explained that how sea level rise and fall impact the mangroves ecosystem. And secondly, that's why we all agree that it is called as a dancing ecosystem as they move landward and seaward with respect to the sea level rise and fall. So once again, I thank you, Dr. Rachna Chandra. And as we know, our time flies like an arrow, and we are getting very close to the end of our webinar. And before I propose thanks to everyone, I would like to conclude the speakers' discussions and recommendations. So during the entire webinar, as we know that we have very eminent speakers. So Professor Deshmukh has shared his research experiences that how basically in Mumbai, the mangroves has been managed through the Mumbai metropolitan region for disaster reduction. And in what manner in Vikroli mangroves, especially the Godrej company, they are focusing more on the protection and restoration of the mangroves for last 125 years. So, and our second speaker was Dr. Rama Subramanian, who have beautifully shared all the ground and the basic level experiences of the mangroves all along the east coast of India from different regions of Godavari and Delta. And definitely, last but not the least, Dr. Rachna Chandra has beautifully explained about the ocean circulation patterns and how the human responded basically to the less precipitation and less fresh water, and how these adverse situations leads to the vulnerable. And she has also very well explained about the resistance and resilience adaptive features initiatives of the mangroves. And she has basically focused on the regional monitoring network is very, very important. And the most important lesson which we got out of these presentation that uh, before 2004, the mangroves were there, and I would say the density and everything, the more mangrove or the luxuriant mangroves were growing. But how these mangroves got the attention, that was only possible after the 2004 tsunami. So that means the mangroves or the another ecosystems like the mangroves, uh, is it important to face the disaster? Or if not, then we need to understand their importance, not only the coastal ecosystem, but the terrestrial ecosystem, how they are very important, and we need to focus to conserve them and protect them. So with this, now I finally would like to thank on behalf of the BSIP and NIDM New Delhi. I extend my sincere thanks to all the distinguished speakers for an enlightening and informative presentations. They inspired basically to get connected with the mangroves for disaster risk reduction. I would like to pay my deep respect to all participants for their basically patient hearing also throughout this webinar. I hope that they have been throughout the webinar a lot of things from this different lectures and presentations. And especially I express my gratitude to Dr. Rajiv Nigam from Goa and Dr. T.M. Banerjee sir from New Delhi for their esteemed presence. I would also like to express our profound gratitude to our director, Dr. Vanna Prasad from BSIP, and Executive Director, Sri Taj Hassan sir from NIDM New Delhi for their support while planning this event. At this juncture, I would also like to thank Dr. Shweta Bette for various help from time to time that we receive from during this webinar. And my sincere thanks to Dr. Professor Anil Gupta sir for providing necessary administrative approval for organizing the event and he continuously supported in all possible ways to organize this webinar, I could say. I also express our thanks to all the staff members, especially Mr. Nille from PSIP and Mr. Sanjay from BPO and other staff members who helped technically in conducting this webinar. And as you know, due to short of time, it was not possible to have the long interactive session. So you hope understand, but no worries. If any kind of questions or queries, and if you would like to connect with mangroves more and more in different levels, so you can easily connect to the today's experts through mail. So with this all, once again, I thank all the participants who attended this webinar and they given their precious time to make a successful event. So with this, I take a home message from today onwards that we must redouble our commitments to reverse the trends of mangroves degradation, protection, restoration mangroves to disaster, to reduce the basically disaster risk in the coastal areas. And also by doing this, we can not only save the mangroves, but we can save our lives too. So once again, I thank you all for your attention and kind cooperation, and hope in coming future we will be able to join again. Stay healthy, stay tuned, and thank you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you everybody for joining, and also thanks a lot Dr. Shilpa for taking all the efforts.
Thank you, Shweta. Thank you, Dr. Rachna. Thank you, Deshmukh
Thank you,
sir.
Shilpa.
Thank you very much. Thank you
Thank
very much.
you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Ramaswamy Subramanian sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for a very useful presentation.